Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm going to review a Savage Worlds setting called RunePunk, Steam, and Chateau. There seems to be a lot of steampunk themes, Savage World settings kicking around. Ripper's had some of those elements. Deadlands Reloaded is full of them, and now I have this one. This seems to be a very popular theme lately, which is cool. I'm a big fan of steampunk. Now, this particular setting is from Blur's Reality and written by Sean Preston. And the premise here is he wanted to put forth a game setting that technology and magic had evolved in parallel. There had never been a time when they had been separate or when one had been dominant over the other. It had always been working together. And the game takes place in the megalopolis known as Scatterpoint. It's comprised of 13 separate districts, and between the districts are 9 separate areas known as the Barrens. And from their name, they're fairly barren. Scatterpoint at one time was the heart of an empire fueled by magic and technology. And the wonderful technomancers of their world had come up with a new device they wanted to try out. It was supposed to be the greatest and latest device ever invented. And it didn't quite work how they planned. Essentially, it ripped the very heart of their capital out of reality and isolated it completely. So Scatterpoint is all there is. It's just an isolated entity to itself. Now, it's not a small entity. It's an area some 600 miles in diameter. That's a lot of territory. And the technology that they brought with them kind of still functioned. Of course, there was massive chaos. There was uprisings and rebellions and warfare, and everything was torn asunder. And slowly over time, the system began to put itself back together again until you eventually end up with the setting as it is here. I'm going to use the table of contents as some notes, as I normally do, which I should have opened up before. Sorry about that. While the steampunk is present, just inventions, there's a lot of magic in this. Again, the magic and the technology did evolve together. So it would be very hard to run this with just one or the other. They really need to be complementary. And I find the feel of this game really hits a nice balance between the two. There's never a point where I thought that one of these was tacked onto the other, which was cool. Of course, you have the introduction chapter. And then you get into the archetypes that are available, like mad inventors, demonologists, rune casters. And then we talk about the races. Now, when I say the rune casters, they actually carve runes. They actually learn to study runes the old-fashioned way by making them into wood and stone and metal. There is an edge you can get at a later date that actually lets you use runes at a greater cost to your spells. But for the most part, runes are drawn on things. That's very important for them to function properly. We have a number of different races available to play. Well, first we have the Andari. The Andari are formerly human. They're very ghost-like, not quite true ghosts, but they've had brushes with the unknown, with the supernatural. For example, they talk about one NPC in here who used a teleportation device and it went wrong. And she had been a normal human being, but afterwards she became an Andari, a race with very much a tie to the spiritual, to the magic. They make good rune casters. We have the Farron, which are a race of humanoid rats. I'm a big fan of anthropomorphic races. Rats are always popular, particularly seeing that this is a very urban setting in anywhere that aren't the Barrens. All the city districts are very urban. Huge buildings, hundreds of floors high. You know, you could be within a block of where you live, there could be 1 million people living. Okay, so having that kind of a rat in the walls, in the sewers kind of a concept is kind of cool. Next we have standard humans, the bog standard human beings, the kind of default for every setting. We have the Malakar, which are kind of half demons. They're playable races. They're not uberly powerful. They have a number of different racial traits they can pick up, which makes them more or less demonic in different ways. And one of the traits they can pick up are wings. And they're called gargoyles when they have wings. And that is just uber cool. The image of these demons with wings soaring from tower to tower is just, it's a wonderful mental image. And then we have the last, which are the Overwrought. And the Overwrought are rune-powered magic cyborgs. They run the factories. They do the menial tasks that no one else wants to do. They're converted by the factory doctors. It's illegal to make them, but funny, they still get made every day. They feed off the rune magic of the very world itself, and they're tied to it. In fact, they can even become addicted to it. And interestingly, out in the barrens, there are natural sources of rune power, usually concentrated in pools. Now, a pool of water infused with magic, to me, sounds like the perfect opportunity to have mutant creatures and humans and what have you. I just think it's very flavorful, and it would be a really great idea to play with. The world, again, because it's not a complete world, it's very sparse. Most of the food is grown in vats, mostly meat. There are certain kinds of plants that exist there, but they're very few and far between. Some of them are used to make alcohol. Some are used to feed the two different steeds in the world. There are newts, which are basically bipedal dinosaur-like creatures that are used as steeds. And then there are these, what are called the skivs or the skiffs, which are giant cockroaches, which is just really cool. Giant cockroaches scuttling between buildings. It's just a great idea. Then we have how the high laws of RunePunk, which all talks about the actual settings, the edges, new skills, new hindrances, how chemistry works, which is an offshoot of the steampunk technology, demonology, which is an offshoot of rune casting, gear and goods, setting rules, specific things like that. Then we get into specifics about the different slang and RunePunk, how the rune magic is used in the game, in the setting itself. The Game Master section, which has got your standard things, background information about the different districts, a really nice selection of generic non-player characters, like generic Farron Skulk, generic Overwrought factory worker, things like that, of different power levels. Very useful. And then we have a great selection of NPCs, named NPCs, wildcards, which are really useful to anyone who's going to run any kind of game. And I think they actually would be very useful even in other games, even though they have a lot of setting-specific information. They're very detailed, nice backgrounds. You file the serial numbers off these things, switch out the names, and I think you could use them elsewhere. Then we have a bunch of secrets of Scatterpoint, lots of good adventure ideas. There is a plot point adventure in here. I did not read it in detail. I find reading adventures, unless I'm going to use them, fairly dull. But since every other Savage World setting I've ever read has been decent, I'm not going to think that this one isn't well documented as well, because the little tiny adventure seeds that were written by Sean Preston were good. So I'm figuring the whole adventure is too. Then when we have a selection of monsters as well, including, as I said, the few remaining animal types in this world. There are cats. I don't believe there are dogs any longer, or not domestic dogs. There are feral dogs, dangerous to the citizenry. This is a nice setting. You can be very urban in this setting. And you could never leave your district, and you could get into all kinds of politicking and who's in power and crime and punishment, and you could really have a tight urban Victorian style steampunk game. But then you could go out into the Barrens, and the Barrens are these wild, chaotic places, you know? They're plagued by rune storms to this day, storms which can pull in people from other dimensions. You could use this setting to suck players from another Savage World game into this, maybe temporarily, maybe forever. And I really think that the way that he described the Barrens gave me this very Thundar the Barbarian vibe. You know, like Malakar barbarians riding, you know, cockroaches with flying gargoyles in the air, and, you know, just overwrought, fighting over pools of rune power. You know, it's just a really interesting concept here. I think it's a good read. It was enjoyable. I think it's very useful. I think it would benefit from Rippers, Deadlands Reloaded, and quite possibly from Day After Ragnarok, because it had an excellent adventure seed rules and random mutation rules, which could both be used in this setting quite easily. I think they would all complement each other quite well. So if you're interested in steampunk in general, but you may be slightly bored with steampunk as it is standard, you want something a little different, you might want to check out RunePunk.